Silent Hill Origins, also known as Silent Hill Zero in Japan, was developed by Climax Studio out of the UK and was released for the PSP on November 6, 2007 in North America. Other territories would follow, along with a PS2 release the following year. The game received mostly positive reviews, which was impressive considering that this was the first Silent Hill game from a Western studio. Getting the title ready for release, though, wasn't an easy process. But first, Patreon. The Patreon campaign helps in all facets of what I do, whether it's buying new things to cover or hardware that helps restore access to lost titles. I'm in the middle of backing up hundreds of discs and hundreds of tapes, which should prove to be the biggest prototype find ever. Thank you to Tiago for joining the campaign this month. If you or your friends would like to contribute, check out patreon.com/p2ponline. Thank you. The first demos of Silent Hill PSP were created by Climax Solent using the Ghost Rider engine. Development was then passed over to Climax Studios out of Los Angeles. The title was initially revealed at E3 2006 in May 2006 for a fall 2006 release date, using an over-the-shoulder camera not unlike Resident Evil 4. The decision was made to hold off on showing a playable demo at E3, giving the team time to focus on the game itself. The game was then quietly shown at LEIPZIG 2006 at the end of August 2006, without much fanfare. It showed off a small section of Silent Hill itself, along with an Asylum demo. Some people who got their hands on the game noted that there was very little to actually do in either demo, noting that it was more of a tech demo. One thing I've noticed in doing my research, though, is that the Asylum demo did have some basic pickups and basically little puzzles that seemed to go unnoticed by many of the people playing the game at the time. Following LEIPZIG, the game's development took a hard turn. In September 2006, the studio began to panic, citing prior mismanagement and a lack of direction negatively impacting the game's development. The direction that the studio was going in just wasn't working, and by the end of October 2006, the decision was made to hand the game over to Climax's UK studios in an effort to turn the game around. This video will focus on the initial efforts by Climax LA and the original vision of Silent Hill Origins. Interviews since the game's release have called the original Silent Hill Origins a dark comedy inspired by Scrubs. To be honest, after reading through the game design document and playing what was available, I don't really see that being as heavy of an influence as the interviews would seem to imply, but it is clear that sweeping changes were made to the game from top to bottom. The footage playing in the background is from various builds and assets from the Climax LA version of Silent Hill Origins. Due to the fact that certain builds don't seem to want to run on the hardware I have available, I've chosen to run the game in an emulator, which should be fairly obvious based on the resolution the game is running at. Let's talk some more about the planned gameplay mechanics beyond the Resident Evil 4 style camera. For fans of the original games, the unique camera angles wouldn't be completely gone, instead serving to introduce players to areas, to build tension, or to simply highlight something in the room. These camera movements would occur as the player entered the area, rather than disorienting them during the gameplay itself. The chilled breath system was designed as an alternative to the radio static of the previous Silent Hill games. The developers simply couldn't count on players using headphones or even having the sound turned on, so they went for the visual element instead. As enemies got closer to Travis, the main character, he would have begun to shiver and his breath would become visible. As the danger inched closer, Travis's breathing would increase in pace. If there were many enemies, the edges of the screen would get frosty. If there were 5 or more monsters, the screen itself would turn a blue tint. In some rooms, the screen would indicate that there is danger nearby, but nothing seemed to be there. More on that shortly. The design document's summary is as follows. To escape Silent Hill, Travis Grady must confront the town's disturbing origins, as well as his own personal demons. The game would have started similarly to the final Origins, with Travis Grady driving his truck down the highway. Forced to stop at the outskirts of Silent Hill, he encounters a mysterious cloaked man with 2 faces, who we later learned is Mr. Twilight. This man flees at the sight of Alessa, who brought along Silent Hill's patented fog, which quickly swallows Travis. Travis would then awake in a hospital room, with Alessa trapped in the other world and the other side of the mirror. The two make a deal. If Travis finds the 4 sides of a bronze pyramid, she will help him escape the town. Dr. Kaufman, who works at the hospital, is studying a drug called White Claudia and believes there is a link between the supernatural occurrences and the drug. Silent Hill is, of course, deserted. Apart from the zombie-like people, shadows of their former selves. The two-faced man is always at the sidelines pulling the strings, but Travis can never seem to catch him. As for the 4 sides of the pyramid, they are, of course, not conveniently located right next to each other. Instead, they are spread out throughout the town. The town itself has some similarities between this version and the final Origins, but much of it has been changed. As for the pyramid pieces, one is located in a decaying hotel where fires have ruined the upper levels and caused the whole structure to be unstable. Another is in the Doyle Asylum for the Disturbed where Dahlia was committed. This area has an electroshock room, a hidden torture chamber, and Dr. Kaufman's lab that he uses to develop and produce his drug. While the place looks nice and extremely cared for when the player enters, by the time they leave, the walls are covered with spikes, and the floors have puddles of blood on them. A third rests in the Orpheum Theater, partially inspired by the original Silent Hill movie. The theater itself was seemingly abandoned in the middle of a show. The last piece is in a meat-packing plant protected by a supernatural butcher. As the player enters this area late in the game, it would have offered a new twist on the chilled breath mechanic. As the player enters the freezers, the breath indicators would all mislead the player into thinking that there are more enemies nearby when there might not be. Of course, there could also be more enemies hiding around the corner as well. There is also a series of catacombs leading to the cult's lair. The tunnels were originally used when the town was a mining town. The cult's lair is the final location in the game, and is a cavernous area carved into the rocks of the mountains. The final showdown with Floros takes place deep within the cult's lair. To quote the design document again, Travis must survive traps, clash with the supernatural, and decipher puzzles in order to break down the barriers separating the two worlds before retrieving the pyramid pieces for Alessa. Each location is populated with twisted versions of the people that lived and worked there. From skeletal bellhops to horrific asylum patients to terrifying undead miners. Being a good little pawn, Travis would, of course, accomplish his task, releasing Alessa from the other world, while also unleashing her nightmare onto Silent Hill. He's been a pawn in an elaborate game between vengeful Alessa, Dahlia, the mother who betrayed her, and an evil cult intent on bringing about a holy apocalypse. Past, present, and future collide as Travis must disrupt the cult's plan to channel a demon's power, break Alessa's spell, solve the mystery of the Cloaked Man, survive a battle with a great Duke of Hell, and confront the memory of his dead father in order to escape the disturbing origins of Silent Hill. One of the main goals of the story was to show how the alternate reality in the other games came to be. During the first level, the player would pick up an item called the Eye of Samuel, which would allow the player to defile the room by using it at a mirror, showing a decaying world. The chilled breath indicator would come into play here as well, as no enemies would be nearby, but the room would still be seemingly cold. This indicated that there is a mirror nearby waiting to be used. Later on in the game, simply using the eye wouldn't be enough. Instead of showing a completely defiled room, the player would have to fix all of the differences between the two rooms before the mirror would activate. Later in the game, the defilement wouldn't be limited to one room either. Instead, it would spread to the surrounding rooms, giving the player new pathways or items to help him explore. This, of course, before the Nightmare World took over the whole town by the end of the game. Throughout the game, Travis is seen protecting Cheryl, who ends up being adopted by Harry Mason and his wife. Monsters like the Afflicted, the Meat Monster, the Straitjacket Monster, the Wheelchair Monster, the Bellhop, and others were all to show up, waiting to end Travis's journey. Bosses like the Piercer and the Butcher, a precursor to the Pyramid Head, would also be waiting. Players would have been able to barricade themselves with objects from the game world to prevent enemies from reaching the player. Objects could be pushed into the enemy's path, but each object would have a set amount of hit points before being destroyed. The objects could also fill in a gap, creating a bridge for the player, or the player could have used the objects to hold down a pressure-sensitive switch. Chairs, couches, cabinets, dressers, and tables were all planned for the system. Puzzles were of course included in the game as well. Beyond the mirror puzzle mentioned earlier, there were also voodoo mannequin and sewing discord puzzles planned. As for weapons, a handful of melee weapons were to be included, although these demos focused mostly on the sledgehammer. Barbed wire, wrapped 2x4s, pickaxes, and shovels would all help round out the inventory. 9mm pistols, revolvers, and shotguns would give the player some range and firepower. But who was Mr. Twilight? In the cult lair at the end of the game, Travis is able to rush Mr. Twilight, peeling off his mask only to reveal Dr. Kaufman. The last encounter with Floros takes place after Dr. Kaufman throws a cloud of White Claudia into Travis's face. Upon defeating Floros, in Travis's mind of course, he helps seal its power inside the Bronze Pyramid. Like other Silent Hill games, there were to be multiple endings. The good ending has Travis finding his truck and getting out of town. Alessa's spirit leaves her child with the orphanage. What's playing in the background now is an early version of the good ending. In the common ending, Travis, confusingly called Jack at this point indicating a possible early name for him, wakes up in room 111 surrounded by empty syringes coated with White Claudia. He discovers a newborn next to a charred body of Alessa, with her spirit form taking the child away. Alessa's parting gift is the knowledge that Travis has been murdering the town's citizens in a White Claudia-induced killing spree. Travis goes mad and becomes Pyramid Head. The bad ending has Travis once again waking up in the hospital with syringes. His body shakes for a few seconds before stopping his fight for life. Mr. Twilight is watching behind the two-way mirror taking notes. It should be noted that some of these endings were probably changed, as you're about to see, because like other Silent Hill games, there was also to be a UFO ending. In one draft of the script, it turns out that the entire game had been a nightmare. But whose nightmare could it possibly be? Was it Mr. Twilight? Perhaps it was Travis, maybe even Harry Mason. Nope, it was Solid Snake of all people. Yes, that's Solid Snake from Metal Gear Solid. I can't make this stuff up. Another, perhaps more appropriate version of the UFO ending has UFOs descending upon the town. Travis asks the aliens for a jump start. They shoot him with a zap gun and the UFOs fly off. As I was nearly done making this video, I stumbled upon some of the major problems that this version of Silent Hill Origins had. Perhaps the largest is the player's motivation for even being in Silent Hill. Travis simply crashed his truck, and his motive to progress through the game? Get back to his truck. After waking up in the hospital room, Travis meets Alessa. Why do they meet? The game really had no reason. There was no connection between the two characters, there was no mystery. There was no excitement. In the final version of the game, changes were made throughout the game to give the player some reason to be visiting all of the locations in Silent Hill, rather than just moving the player along. Silent Hill's design itself was seen as an issue too. While the town was wide open, it also revealed the limitations of the PSP and that the town could only be so large. While other games in the series blocked off sections of the town, this wide open option never had a way of really organically guiding the player throughout Silent Hill. This open design with the hospital as a hub also meant that players were repeatedly backtracking through the same sections of town over and over again. Designers were worried that this gave the impression that Alessa is physically trapped in the hospital, noting that this isn't consistent with the original Silent Hill game, nor the ending with Alessa in the cult's lair. Designers also took issue with the defilement mechanic. By limiting it to just one room or a handful of rooms at a time, it was actually mechanically different than previous titles, while also providing less features than the old titles. The weapons in the game were thought to be dull, offering nothing new over previous games. They felt the weapons didn't really take advantage of Travis's more aggressive profile. Adding to this further, the monsters were seen as too much of a departure from the main series, which the public had not received well. These problems, combined with the other project management issues, all helped lead to the demise of Climax LA's Silent Hill Origins. While there is more art to be shared at a future date, and certainly more gameplay footage, I think I've crammed enough into one video for now. Do hit that subscribe button, follow me on Twitter, check us out on Patreon, the usual, and until next time, thanks for watching.